In our headlines on this Tuesday, November 19th, here in South Korea. Addressing the audience at this year's Group of 20 Summit in Brazil, President Yoon highlights the need for a fundamental solution against global hunger while pledging greater aid to countries in need. Also, at the Group of 20 Summit, world leaders vowed to promote an open, inclusive, multilateral trade framework in preparation of Donald Trump's return to the White House with tougher tariffs and a foreign policy that places America first. Meanwhile, Ukraine marks a solemn milestone on this Tuesday. That is the 1,000th day of Russian invasion that has killed thousands of Ukrainians and displaced over 6 million who now live as refugees overseas. We start yet again in Brazil, where President Yoon has vowed tangible efforts to fight global hunger. Our Oh Soo-young reports.
President Yoon pledged $10 million to battle hunger in Africa and the ramping up of global food aid by 50,000 tons next year. This came as the South Korean leader attended the G20 Summit, which kicked off on Monday in Rio de Janeiro. After participating in the launch of the Brazil-led Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, Yoon set out South Korea's contributions and solutions. He announced Seoul will provide $10 million worth of humanitarian aid to address Africa's food crisis by the end of the year. He also said South Korea plans to ramp up its global food aid contribution by 50,000 tons to 150,000 in 2025 through the United Nations World Food Programme. Seoul has already doubled its contribution this year compared to 2023.
At this year's G20 Summit, President Yoon emphasised that achieving a sustainable future for humanity requires inclusive economic growth in developing countries. He stressed the importance of structural reform and fiscal innovation in developing nations to leverage the private sector's capabilities fully. He also argued that the G20, as the top forum for global economic cooperation, must support efforts to create new growth drivers in developing countries.
In this regard, Yoon announced South Korea's intent to increase contributions to the International Development Association by 45% compared to 2021. The IDA, as part of the World Bank, provides grants and low-interest loans to help countries invest in their futures. He also said Seoul will look to increase its contributions to the Pandemic Fund, which aims to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness and response capacities. Based on South Korea's own experience of rising from the ashes of war and poverty, President Yoon highlighted the country's role as a bridge of prosperity, connecting developing and advanced economies. The Yoon administration held South Korea's first ever bilateral summits with Pacific Island Forum countries and African Union nations, and plans to hold a summit with Central Asian countries in 2025. Furthermore, the president emphasised that economic growth of developing countries can only be achieved within the framework of a rules-based order, noting North Korea's large-scale troop deployments to Russia and that the Ukraine war has entered a critical phase. Yoon strongly urged Moscow and Pyongyang to immediately cease their illegal military cooperation. Yoon further appealed to G20 leaders to unite in their will and actions to uphold the global rules-based order. The leaders of Japan, Germany, Canada and Australia also criticised the Russian-North Korea axis, deeming it a threat to global security. On the sidelines of the multilateral summit, President Yoon also met with the leaders of MICTA countries, Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey and Australia for the third consecutive year. They adopted a joint statement reaffirming their commitment to cooperate on areas such as sustainable development, world peace and security and global governance. Amid growing concerns around the world over North Korea's collaboration with Russia, the MICTA leaders called on all UN member states to uphold the UN Charter and abide by Security Council resolutions. Addressing the meeting of the world's 19 largest economies, the European Union and the African Union, President Yoon on Tuesday will emphasise South Korea's role as a green ladder to help developing economies achieve both growth and carbon neutrality. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Rio de Janeiro.
Also in Brazil, and as mentioned earlier, global leaders at this year's Group of 20 Summit have sought to shed greater light on global poverty and hunger through the launch of a new alliance. Our Yoon has details.
In a few moments,
Leaders of the G20 economies gathered at Rio de Janeiro's Modern Art Museum on Monday for a two-day summit. It opened with Brazilian President Lula as host of this year's G20 meetings, launching a global alliance to combat poverty and hunger.
The alliance is born in the G20, but its destiny is global. May this summit be marked by the courage to act. Therefore, I officially declare the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty launched.
With backing from more than 80 countries, along with multilateral banks and major philanthropies such as the Rockefeller Foundation and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the goal of the Task Force for a Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty is to establish a global alliance to gather funds and knowledge toward the implementation of public policies and social technologies which have proven effective in reducing global hunger and poverty. Among other topics of discussion, including the conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, and cooperation on climate change and tax policy, the leaders also focused on multilateral consensus for a shifting global order before the start of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's second administration in January. The G20 leaders pledged to deliver a free, open, fair, non-discriminatory, transparent, inclusive, and predictable trade and investment environment, echoing the G20's existing commitment to ensuring rules-based, non-discriminatory trade. 이은진, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden took the G20 platform to promote peace, while Chinese President Xi Jinping called for cooperation to build an inclusive environment for international trade. Ising covers their remarks.
U.S. President Joe Biden is in Brazil, attending his last G20 summit before the end of his presidency. There, he took the time to call for an end to crises unfolding around the world. Biden reiterated U.S. support for Ukraine's sovereignty, while calling for efforts for a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas.
The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Everyone around this table, in my view, should as well. The United States has led the world in humanitarian aid to Gaza. And we're going to keep pushing to accelerate a ceasefire deal that ensures Israel's security but brings hostages home and ends the suffering of the Palestinian people and children.
Biden noted that the G20 this year is his last, and also called on world leaders to continue to assist countries in need to usher in a new era of sustainable development. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping signaled a change in his foreign policy, as if the Chinese leader is preparing for worsening U.S.-China relations under the second Trump administration. During the G20 summit, Xi stated that the international community must build an open, inclusive, and non-discriminatory environment for mutual cooperation, and expressed Beijing's willingness to invest in developing countries. This marks a stark contrast to his previous give-and-take policy, as pundits say Xi may be looking to diversify its market in preparation for Trump's second stint in the White House. 이승재, Arirang News.
Russia's aerial assaults against Ukraine intensified over the weekend, and on Monday, new strikes targeting the city of Odessa killed 10 people. Now, this latest attack follows news of the U.S. granting green light to Ukraine for the launch of long-range American missiles for strikes inside Russia. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung reports.
With the war in Ukraine nearing its third year, Russia launched its largest aerial attack on Ukraine in months. Its ballistic missiles hit Ukraine's Black Sea port of Odessa on Monday. At least 10 people reportedly have been killed and dozens wounded, according to the region's local governor. Moscow's latest aerial attacks on Ukraine followed reports that outgoing U.S. President Biden authorized Kyiv to use powerful long-range American weapons in Russian territory. One expert says this serves as more than a warning to North Korea after the regime deployed troops to help out Russia.
Well, it's more than just a warning to North Korea, really. Ukraine will now use those U.S.-supplied ATACMS, these longer-range missiles, to strike targets not only in Russian-occupied Ukraine, but in Russia itself, and that includes North Korean forces.
Experts agree this could give Ukraine a bargaining chip and also boost its defense capabilities.
This is a dramatic step because it does give the Ukrainians the ability to hit really important military points and infrastructural points inside Russia, and that will absolutely have an effect on Russia's ability to wage war.
But he added it can't be a game changer, and for Ukraine to win the war, more needs to be done to squeeze Russia, particularly in the months before President-elect Donald Trump comes into power. Regarding Biden's decision, there was no direct comment from the U.S. State Department during a briefing on Monday, but it did say that the U.S. had been clear to always adapt and adjust the capabilities the U.S. provides to Ukraine when it is appropriate to do so. The Kremlin accused Biden of escalating hostilities, saying it is obvious the U.S. wants to, quote, throw oil on the fire and escalate the conflict, and that it is going to bring a qualitatively new round of tension. However, EU member states welcomed Washington's decision, and the European Union's foreign policy chief further urged member states to allow Ukraine to use EU-supplied arms to strike targets inside Russia, saying Ukraine needs to use the arms EU provides to not only stop the arrow but also hit the archers. Meanwhile, Germany is to deliver 4,000 strike drones, dubbed Mini Taurus, to Ukraine, according to the AFP reports, though it reiterated it won't be sending its long-range Taurus cruise missiles. 김보경, Arirang News.
Over in the Middle East, Israel and the militant group Hezbollah based in Lebanon continue to trade fierce fire amid the planned arrival of a U.S. delegation seeking peace. Our Yoon has the latest.
Amid the escalating bombardments between Israel and Hezbollah, U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein is expected to arrive in Beirut on Tuesday to discuss a U.S.-backed ceasefire proposal. This comes as Lebanon and Hezbollah have shown a willingness to engage in ceasefire talks. However, earlier statements from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu indicated that even if an agreement is reached, Israel will continue its military operations against Hezbollah. Meanwhile, civilian casualties continue to rise. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, following another Israeli strike on central Beirut on Monday, 5 people were killed and more than 30 have been left injured. This follows Sunday's Israeli strike, which killed Hezbollah's chief spokesperson and resulted in additional civilian casualties. Hezbollah continued its strikes on Israel, with one rocket hitting a building in the city of Shefaram, northern Israel on Monday, killing 1 Israeli woman. Israel's rescue team reported that 10 others were injured in the attack. According to the Israeli military, shrapnel from an intercepted missile over the city of Tel Aviv wounded at least 6 people, including 1 woman who's in critical condition. On that same day, Hezbollah claimed responsibility for launching airstrikes with drones targeting sensitive military points in Tel Aviv. Yoon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea's state media carries coverage of Kim Jong-un going out of his way to warmly welcome a Russian delegation, and pundits here respond to this rare reception. Our Kim Jong-sil explains.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un showed exceptional hospitality to Russia's Natural Resources Minister Alexander Kozlov, who arrived in Pyongyang over the weekend. Video released by North Korea's state-run media shows Kim smiling as he shakes hands with the Russian minister and engaging in discussions at a table. Throughout the meeting, Kim is seen smiling widely. The footage also includes scenes of Kim personally escorting Kozlov outside the building, a rare gesture highlighting their growing alignment. North Korean state media also reported that Kim and Kozlov discussed strengthening bilateral cooperation in trade, science, and technology under the new treaty signed in June. The Russian delegation led by Minister Kozlov arrived in Pyongyang on Sunday for the 11th Trade and Science Cooperation Committee meeting. A South Korean Unification Ministry official told reporters on Tuesday that this was the first time a Russian representative has met directly with Kim during this kind of meeting. One expert in South Korea speculated that Kim's exceptional hospitality may be linked to the new treaty coming into effect.
President Putin recently signed the new treaty, and it's possible the delegation brought the ratified documents to North Korea. Once both sides sign them, the treaty will take effect only after the ratified documents are exchanged. I think it's highly possible that those documents were brought along.
Professor Kim added that with North Korea sending a delegation to Moscow on Monday, it's likely the ratified North Korean documents were carried. He noted that the treaty will take effect once the documents are exchanged, which could happen as early as Tuesday. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has reaffirmed intentions to use the military for mass deportation of undocumented immigrants in response to a post by Tom Fitton, the head of Judicial Watch, a non-profit conservative activist group who forecasts that the Trump administration will use military assets for a mass deportation program. Mr. Trump took to his social platform to say it was true. The president-elect previously suggested he would declare a national emergency and use wartime powers as well as military troops to carry out a mass deportation. Back here in South Korea, the prosecution has indicted the head of the country's main opposition party, that is Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party, for improper use of provincial funds during his tenure as governor of Gyeonggi-do Province. The Suwon District Prosecutor's Office indicted Lee Jae-myung without detention on charges of occupational breach of trust, accusing him of misusing over 100 million Korean won, or some $76,500 through the provincial government's credit cards. Lee Jae-myung is also accused of using government-provided vehicle services for personal purposes. This latest indictment places the opposition leader under 4 ongoing trials and an appeals court hearing. In other news, the crucial role of workshops in nurturing emerging talent in the field of performing arts is on display this week as participants of a related project put on stage the fruits of their labor. Our correspondent Song Yoo-jin gives us a glimpse.
For young artists, the path to success is rarely paved with gold due to unstable pay and limited opportunities. However, for the performers in this play, that dream is starting to come alive. This production, titled Jojo, is the opening act of South Korea's first ever Young Artist Festival Week, where future stars in theater, classical music, ballet, and contemporary dance from the Culture Ministry's Young Artist Project perform after months of training. Earlier this year, 329 aspiring artists were chosen from an intensely competitive pool with nearly 10 applicants eyeing each spot. Over the past 8 months, they've worked alongside 9 national art companies, receiving training from experts and invaluable stage experience. These actors are part of the 40 young talents selected to train with the National Theatre Company of Korea.
We worked with 40 rookies with a wide range of experiences, learning styles, and skills. Our focus was on exploring how we could bring everyone together to speak with one voice. The process was an opportunity to delve into the core of theater as a collective art form.
After months of hard work, these actors finally took the stage to showcase their talent.
Even though some of us have already debuted, this program allowed us to step back, refine our skills, and re-enter the professional world with confidence. The National Theatre Company of Korea brought in incredible directors and instructors who taught us acting techniques, Pilates, and speech training.
What I gained most was learning from my peers. Working with 40 talented actors, I discovered so much by observing their strengths. It's an experience I'll carry with me forever.
The Young Artist Project is just getting started, with even more participants set to join next year.
We plan to include 600 participants. We hope these young talents can travel nationwide, performing in places that don't get the opportunities to enjoy cultural activities. It's about sharing their artistry with the people who need it most.
Young Artist Festival Week continues with performances by trainees of the Korean National Symphony Orchestra and the National Chorus of Korea on Monday, the Korean National Ballet on Tuesday, and the Korea National Contemporary Dance Company this weekend. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. A stabbing spree in broad daylight in the middle of Manhattan has left many New Yorkers in shock. New York City police said 2 people were killed and 1 left in critical condition after a homeless man began what appears to be an unprovoked stabbing spree on Monday morning local time. Authorities also said the 51-year-old suspect is in custody. The attacks began at 8:22 a.m. when the first victim, a 36-year-old Hispanic male construction worker, was stabbed in the abdomen while at work on 444 West 19th Street. At 10:27 a.m., the assailant stabbed a 68-year-old Asian male who was fishing on 500 East 30th Street. Both men were pronounced dead after being taken to hospital. A 36-year-old black female was stabbed multiple times near the UN headquarters almost 30 minutes later, leaving her in a critical condition. One witness said that the knife-wielding assailant was carrying a mask and 2 really big knives. Now, NYPD Chief of Detectives Joseph Kenny said that the suspect had 8 prior arrests, with the latest in October this year, while NYC Mayor Eric Adams said authorities will look into why he was out on the street. Moving on to Australia, where influential media figure and ex-Australian national rugby team coach Alan Jones was arrested on Monday over allegations of sexually abusing 7 men and a 17-year-old boy. Jones, who anchored a popular Sydney breakfast show for some 18 years, now faces 24 charges, including 11 counts of aggravated indecent assault for alleged incidents from 2001 to 2019, which, except for 2 common assault charges, are all sex offences. The 83-year-old was taken into custody at his Sydney apartment on Monday morning, while the New South Wales Police Child Abuse Squad searched his property. New South Wales Police Commissioner Karen Webb said that they had conducted a very complex investigation and called for other victims to come forward, saying nothing is too old to be investigated. Super Typhoon Mani, which swept across the Philippines over the weekend, has left at least 8 dead as local residents clean up after the storm's damage. Forecasters previously warned of a life-threatening storm surge, and some 500,000 residents were evacuated as the super typhoon made its second landfall on the country's main island of Luzon on Sunday. According to the Philippines news agency, Mani's peak gusts were recorded at some 305 kilometers per hour. The super typhoon left heavy damage to homes and infrastructure, including power lines. Mani is now the 6th typhoon to hit the Philippines in the span of a month. The cumulative death toll from the previous 5 typhoons was at least 160 people. And finally to Ethiopia and the latest edition of the country's annual international 10-kilometer road race held in the capital Addis Ababa on Sunday. This year's Great Ethiopian Run International 10 kilometers saw 43,000 participants, some 5,000 runners more than last year's edition. The men's race was won by a 17-year-old Binyan Mehari, who ran the 10 kilometers in 28 minutes and 26 seconds, while the women's race was won by Asayek Ayichu in 32 minutes and 14 seconds. Kim Xiang, Arirang News.
With a cold wind, the feels-like temperatures stayed below 0 this morning across the country. From the daytime, the cold was relieved by recovering to the previous year's temperatures. Tomorrow's temperatures will be very similar to today's. Starting at 0 degrees in the morning, Seoul will move up to 12 degrees during the day. Do expect wide temperature gaps of more than 10 degrees for most parts of the country. Jeju Island will be mostly cloudy tomorrow and we'll see some rainfall until the afternoon. At night, rain will begin on the west coast of Gyeonggi-do Province, Gangwon-do Province, and the Chungcheong-do Provinces. This estimated amount is around 5 millimeters in these areas. Tomorrow, Chuncheon will start off at -1 degree, Daegu 4 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 13 degrees in Daejeon and Daegu, Busan 16 degrees. No major cold is expected for the rest of the week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon the series of sideline summits between South Korea and its partners over in South America.
How to survive in Korea. Weddings. Step 0. Attire. As a guest, dress formal to business casual. Avoid wearing all white, shorts or going topless. Step 1. Arrival time. Arrive 30 minutes prior to the wedding ceremony. Too many cars, too many halls, too many people. There are many twists and turns. Take pictures and shake hands. And write your name vertically, not horizontally, in the guest book. Step 2. Or, shibor. 50,000 won, 100,000 won, 150,000 won. Cash gifts are given in these units. Decide on the amount based on your relationship. Write your name vertically on the envelope. Step 3. Wedding etiquette. Fill up the front row. Guests have 3 duties to fulfill: clapping, cheering, and taking pictures. Step 4. Dining. Take off your jacket. This will be your seat from now on. Start with the not your everyday delicacies. Kalbijim. Yes. Bosa. Yes. Chili shrimps. Definitely yes. Kimbap. Yeah. Only if you can't live without it. No need to pile up food. You have more than one opportunity. Did you survive the wedding? Wait. Did someone catch your eye? What are you waiting for? You're looking fine today.
영양군에 인생샷을 남길 수 있는 꽃이 너무 많아요. 따라 펼쳐진 갤럭시
Concerns over North Korea's acts of aggression, including its dispatch of soldiers to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine, have fueled a flurry of diplomatic interactions between South Korea and its global partners. Given the broader security implications of such brazen belligerence, we have details on this edition of Press Perspective. Hello, it's Tuesday, November 19th here in South Korea, and you're watching Press Perspective, our daily panel session with members of the media on issues largely pertaining to the Korean Peninsula. Today, we touch upon the sideline summits held by President Yoon Suk-yeol while in South America for the multilateral APEC gathering. For this, I have Chun So-ram, a reporter for US-funded news agency Radio Free Asia. So-ram, welcome back.
Thank you.
I also have Chloe Bognon, a correspondent for French public broadcaster France 24. Chloe, as always, it's great to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
Right, So-ram, we'll start with you. Let's begin with details of the trilateral talks among the leaders of South Korea, the US and Japan on the sidelines of the APEC summit in Peru. What was the gist of their discussions?
So there are two key points about the trilateral talks between the leaders of South Korea, the US and Japan. So firstly, they shared concern about North Korea and Russia's growing military ties, and they also agreed to set up trilateral secretariats to expand their three countries' cooperation. So South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, US President Joe Biden, and Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba Shigeru met last Friday and issued a joint statement focused on key global security concerns. So the three leaders strongly condemned North Korea's recent troops deployment to Russia, calling it a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. They also criticizes Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and they reaffirmed their support for Ukraine's right to self-defense. The leaders emphasized their commitment to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and vowed to respond firmly to North Korea's violation of UN resolutions, including its weapon programs, illegal cyber activities, and so on. And to strengthen three countries' cooperation, they announced the creation of the new trilateral secretariat to enhance security in the Indo-Pacific region. They also reaffirmed their dedication to promote human rights, democracy, and stability across the Indo-Pacific and beyond, expressing confidence that their partnership will play a key role in maintaining peace in the years to come.
Right. All that being said, Chloe, what were some of your takeaways from this latest trilateral meeting?
So what's interesting to see as well is the fact that it was the first time that the three heads of state were meeting since the Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba took office in October. So it's kind of interesting to see if Japan were to follow the trail of trilateral action. From what we can see, it's the case. So I would like to come back again on the trilateral secretariat. That's, in fact, kind of a step forwards because of the uncertainty with Donald Trump re-election and what could happen to this trilateral cooperation. So the secretariat is really there to make sure that it can coordinate and implement the different goals that they will share. And as it was said, is to make sure that it's just going to be just a series of meetings. So kind of making sure that there is action taken after the words. So that's kind of interesting to see that. There's also a point that was interesting made by Joe Biden, the actual US president, say that he was very proud and it was one of his great achievements to have gotten South Korea and Japan to speak and to work together again. So I feel this is something that we might have to nuance, because I feel like it was also part of President Yoon's own foreign affair, of the policy and diplomacy, to be turning around and not going further with the US, but also with Japan in collaboration. But it's interesting to see that for Joe Biden, this is considered as one of his proud moments of his mandate, as he's going to leave soon the head of state of the United States. Also, it's interesting to see that regarding the tension that there is in the area like that are building up. So just as Soram just said that we have North Korea and Russia military agreements, North Korean nuclear program, as well as the US relationship with China, with Donald Trump coming back to power, might get a bit worse and might worsen a little bit. So it's interesting to see that the three countries are now trying to cement everything to try to keep as stable as possible in the Indo-Pacific area.
Right. They do seem to seek to institutionalize their security partnership, of course. Sora, meanwhile, according to North Korea state media, Kim Jong-un has called on his military to bolster capabilities for an actual war. What do you suppose is the purpose of such rhetoric?
So Kim Jong-un recently called on his military to boost its war-fighting capabilities, blaming the U.S. and its allies for raising tensions on the Korean Peninsula. So it's important to note that this Kim's speech and the order came after international criticism over growing military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. So thousands of North Korean troops have been sent to Russia to support the war in Ukraine. So Kim also ordered the mass production of suicide drones. So this raises speculation that North Korea may also begin providing drones for use in the Ukraine conflict. So experts suggest that this move could be influenced by after Kim seeing drones having prominent role in the Ukraine conflict. So experts also believe that Russia also might be offering drone technology to North Korea, so they are worried about that too. So some also view North Korea's push for drone production as a potential threat to South Korea. So RFA recently contacted to the U.S. Department of State regarding North Korea's mass drone production issue. And the U.S. said they are alarmed over the growing military ties between North Korea and Russia, calling it a threat to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and beyond.
Right. And staying with North Korea's military cooperation with Russia, Chloe, there is also speculation that North Korea could send up to 100,000 soldiers to support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What is this speculation based on, and how worried do you suppose should we be?
So this is that was cited, quoted by our colleagues from Bloomberg, so the press agency. They're citing, they're saying that it's from someone from the G20 nations. We don't really know which country it would be because it's based on anonymous information. What they are saying is that North Korea may end up sending 100,000 soldiers in North Korea. So that sounds like a very alarming number, but what they're also saying is it is actually would be not in one go, not in one batch, would be more like a few extra troops every time to actually rotate the troops that are currently in Russia and fighting against Ukraine. So do we have to be alarmed? I would say not yet, because it is said that it's just one hypothesis on how the relationship could go between, could develop actually between North Korea and Russia. Again, that sounds like a very big number, but it's not going to be all in one time. But it's still interesting to note that it could be it's one of the hypotheses that's developed by some of the countries, because that would also mean fresh troops for Russia in a longer term. So that's interesting to see that it is an hypothesis that is taken in account for the war and the pursuit of this war between Russia and Ukraine.
Right. And against the backdrop of that speculation, Soram, and also after the trilateral talks, President Yoon and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden held a brief bilateral meeting where they reaffirmed their commitment to their country's alliance. What is your evaluation of the Seoul-Washington response to Pyongyang's persistent provocations under the Yoon and Biden administration, Soram?
So under the Yoon and the Biden administration, South Korea and the U.S. cooperation have strengthened, but there were not so much interaction with North Korea. Some experts point out that there were no diplomacy with North Korea under the Biden's presidency. So with that situation, North Korea has continued its weapon development and advanced its nuclear capabilities. The provocation has continued, including ballistic missile test, ICBM launch, the balloon wars between South and North Korea, and the blowing up of its inter-Korean roads, and so on. So experts say Pyongyang did not show much interest with talking to Washington, and it seems like Washington hasn't been eager to change its approach to North Korea either. So the U.S. is sticking to its demand for North Korea's complete denuclearization, which is not an option for North Korea this time. So experts say that the gap between the North Korea and the U.S. hasn't been narrowed down under the Biden administration. However, there are also some positive parts of it. The Biden administration emphasized the importance of the South Korea and U.S. alliance, U.S. and Japan alliance, and the trilateral cooperation. So this could bolster nuclear deterrence in Northeast Asia. Also, another positive part is that the Biden administration made efforts to talk to North Korea at any place, at any time on any issue. So many experts mainly blamed North Korea for the reason of the lack of dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington.
Right. Chloe, President Yoon, aside from his talks with President Biden, also sat down separately with his Japanese counterpart Shigeru Ishiba on the margins, of course, of the APEC meeting in Peru. Does cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo look to move beyond their current levels under a second Trump administration, do you think?
Yeah, I would think it's quite certain. So the fact that Donald Trump is coming back is kind of casting a cloud of uncertainty for those two countries who have been building up a lot of relationship with the US. So we were speaking about that before, but there's a stronger alliance with the US that have been developed during Joe Biden's mandate for Japan and for South Korea. So then now they face kind of a period of doubts about what the US are going to do. Will they withdraw? Will they keep going? Will that be like, because of that, there is a need for the two countries to get stability. So we spoke about it. It was done now with the trilateral secretariat, but on their side, what they could do, there is at least two very strong subjects that they can work together on. First one will be economics. Because of the US-China war trade that didn't really stop under Biden administration, but will go on with Trump administration, this is quite sure. Japan and South Korea both are exporting a lot to the US market, so they need to find a way to stay strong, even if the Trump administration kind of changed rules. We saw that's like green economy or semiconductors, everything is a bit like not sure of what's going to happen, because there's this rule of America first. So Donald Trump wants to get everything done in America by Americans, and South Korea or Japan, they could suffer from that. So that would be good for them to be able to side up and be stronger in front of the US in case of negotiation. Second thing would be security. So Donald Trump has already said, he said it before in his first mandate, he said it already during speech during the campaign, he wants like the countries who have US troops stationed to pay more. Like if we give the example of South Korea, he wants South Korea to pay $10 billion every year. So that would be 9 times stronger than what Korea is already paying for. And Japan is already also having like a strong amount of US troops stationed in the country. So that for both of them is a bit of a hard bargain. And because this is like security from the US is needed at the moment, but should the two countries pay that much money? That's kind of the question. The other thing that could also happen is the declaration made at Camp David with so South Korea, the US and Japan. trilateral cooperation enhancement could be reduced to zero if Donald Trump decides to withdraw from any trilateral agreements. And the last thing is Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un could restart a dialogue. It happened in the first mandate, and Donald Trump already said that he would like to discuss with him again, to speak about the nuclear threats, as we just said, but that would be from the point of view of the US, and might not be in the interest of Japan or South Korea.
Right. Well, exactly, Chloe, as you mentioned, former President Donald Trump, who is also the president-elect as we speak, he spoke of Kim Jong-un missing him, I believe, while on the campaign trail. That being said, Soram, do you suppose a second Trump administration could serve to perhaps ease tensions on the Korean Peninsula?
Some experts say that while Trump administration may not be able to resolve the long-term issues of the Korean Peninsula, there is a possibility that the tensions on the Korean Peninsula could ease during his presidency. If two countries resume dialogue, North Korea could be refrained from provocations and could go back to the stage where inter-Korean relationships were not hostile. So during presidential campaign, as you mentioned, Trump mentioned about having a good relationship with Kim Jong-un. So since he might want to continue pursuing that good relationship with him, there is a possibility that North Korea and the U.S. relations may experience some improvement when the Trump administration begins. Experts predict that although it's not going to be easy, efforts to resume dialogue between the U.S. and North Korea could start. And in the progress, North Korea's nuclear program and ICBM development may be frozen in exchange for some easing sanctions. So therefore, the situation on the Korean Peninsula may become more stable than the current situation. However, the prerequisites for the talks between North Korea and the U.S. would be the end of Russia and Ukraine war. North Korea is heavily involved in the Russia-Ukraine war as North Korea sent troops to Russia. So this could be one of the obstacles for the U.S.-North Korea talks.
Right. Meanwhile, Chloe, during a bilateral summit between President Yoon Suk-yeol and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader shared hopes for a strategic partnership with South Korea based on, and I quote, geographical proximity, cultural affinity, and economic integration. Again, what are your thoughts regarding cooperation between Seoul and Beijing under a second Trump administration?
So there again, I would say that there is a need for the two countries to develop relationship. It's interesting to see that the last time the two heads of state met, it was 2 years ago. So I mean, bilateral relationships between China and South Korea has been developing, and we have seen the foreign minister, like the prime minister, so coming to South Korea and on the other way as well. So I feel like relationships are existing and they have not stopped or under any circumstances. But it's interesting to see that the two presidents are meeting again now. So obviously China is always targeted by the Donald Trump administration, and he's been speaking about it, like especially in economic terms. So for China point of view, there is a need to get to better relationship with South Korea. So, for example, it's interesting to see that Xi Jinping called for safeguarding the free trade system between the two countries, and he said that China will be open to get Korean capitals, and so interesting to see that as one of the main points developed there. There is also the fact that for China, there is something about the fact that Russia, that was also a partner, and North Korea, that was another partner, they are getting closer on their side. And so China would need to get other allies in the peninsula. From the South Korean point of view, there is also a question of security once again, because China wants peace in the area here in the Korean peninsula. And Yoon Suk-yeol said that for him, China is, and I quote him, an important engine to contribute to regional peace and stability. So that's interesting to see that there is like two strong points there in the relationship, and both the countries know that it would be economics and it would be securities, and they're aware of it, even if the stance are a bit like different from both countries. But it's interesting to see that dialogue is going on and is being quite transparent and clear there.
Right, and speaking of dialogue going on, Soram, during bilateral talks with U.S. President Joe Biden, Chinese President Xi Jinping spoke about seeking amicable ties with the U.S. under a second Trump administration, as long as the incoming president does not cross, and I believe he said 4 red lines. What are the 4 red lines, and do you believe Mr. Trump will abide by these red lines?
So China's President Xi Jinping set 4 red lines, as you mentioned. So the red lines are Taiwan issue, democracy and human rights, China's patent system, and lastly, the country's right to development. In a statement after the meeting with Biden, Xi emphasized that these are the red lines and they must not be challenged. And also added that these are the most important safety notes for the U.S.-China relations. So the U.S. President-elect Donald Trump uses American first foreign policy approach. So during his term, he was often criticized by international community by not putting great emphasis on human rights issue. So that's one part. However, it's unclear if Trump will accept all the 4 red lines. He has threatened to hit Beijing with extensive trips on all imports from China, and he nominated a few hardliners on China to lead his foreign policy team. So it's highly likely that if Trump returns to the White House, he may impose higher tariffs, not only on China, but also on other U.S. allies. So also during Trump's first term, he focused on countering China's rise and took a tough stance. So it looks like his second term will keep the same focus on China. So experts are not expecting the U.S.-China relation to start off on a positive level. So right now it seems that way, but we may get a clear picture when Trump administration kicks off.
Right, next January that would be. Chloe, beyond Asia, how is Europe, namely France, preparing for a second Trump administration?
So France and Europe actually together is getting ready, because there have been changes in 4 years. I mean, 4 years ago, Donald Trump was head of state. Emmanuel Macron was also head of state, but mostly because of the war in Ukraine, things have changed. So Europe has 3 big worries regarding the position of the Trump administration. Would be the U.S. position on war in Ukraine, U.S. position on wars in the Middle East, and lastly, the position of U.S. against China in a commercial war. So what France could work on is in Ukraine, they could try to secure a guarantee, get security guarantees if there is a deal struck with Russia, which seems to be the position that wants to take Donald Trump, but we're not sure about that. Then there will also be, we have to get ready for a commercial war kind of against France with a tax on import products, again, America first policy. And the last thing will also be the question of French relationship, for example, with China. But this is already something that was happening with pressure coming from the Joe Biden administration as well, asking France to kind of get away from China's in a commercial matter and get closer to the US. So that would probably still be a strong point of integration.
Some issues for France to work on then as we move forward. All right, Chloe, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Soram, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow with a look at the latest Group of 20 Summit in Brazil this week and its broader implications.
Completely new